Hey guys, tonight we step into a Viking village, where the air is damp with morning mist and curling smoke rises from rough-hewn longhouses, twisting lazily toward the pale dawn. You probably won't survive this day, or at least not without tripping over a pig or nearly chopping your own foot with a half-dull axe. But we're going to explore it gently, slowly, and yes, with a little chuckle at your imagined misfortune. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments so I know who's journeying with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, the kind that immediately reminds you left the oven on back home, though in this case it's the village hearths, burning low in the longhouses. Mist clings to your clothes and hair as you push open the rough wooden door of your temporary lodgings. A modest hut with walls of interlocking planks and a thatched roof that has clearly seen one too many winters. Chickens scatter in the yard, cackling at your sudden intrusion, and a pig snorts suspiciously, rooting at the mud in search of breakfast. Already, the rhythm of this morning is unyielding. No coffee, no warm shower, just the raw scent of earth, animals, and fire. Villagers begin to stir. You notice a burly man carrying a bucket of water from the well, one hand gripping the rope and the other adjusting his linen tunic. A small girl hurries past, wooden clogs clattering, balancing a tray of salted fish that tilts alarmingly with each step. You trudge behind, careful not to slip, feeling the sticky mud cling to your boots, tugging you down with every step. A cow lowing nearby offers a mournful soundtrack, reminding you that, yes, breakfast for these people includes tasks you'd probably delegate to a robot if you could. Historians still argue whether Viking villages were organized more efficiently than we imagine or if chaos was the rule rather than the exception. Your nose picks up the aroma of yesterday's fire-dried bread, mingling oddly with the metallic tang of sharpened tools left out to dry overnight. You catch glimpses of smoke curling from other homes, each scent telling a story of oats, barley, fish, or salted meat. A cheeky thought strikes. You might just survive if you could perfect the art of sniffing out edible morsels before the pigs get to them. One man bends to tend a small fire pit, patting the coals and muttering a verse under his breath. A practice no one really explains, yet somehow it brings calm to the chaos of dawn. You trudge further into the village square. Frost crunches underfoot. The wooden cart wheels leave grooves in the damp soil, and a huddle of villagers discusses yesterday's catch while avoiding a puddle that seems suspiciously deep. You notice, almost humorously, that everyone's tunics are patched repeatedly, a quilt of experience stitched together with practicality. There's a rhythm here. Collect water, stoke fires, tend animals, chop wood, all while maintaining an air of calm that you find admirable and slightly exhausting. You remind yourself that this is just the first hour. A long, muddy, aromatic day lies ahead. By the time the first sun rays slice through mist, illuminating the village with soft gold, your senses are fully awake, perhaps too awake. You catch a whiff of something odd, a mixture of herbs and fermented fish, and pause, wondering if anyone else notices it or if your modern nose simply overreacts. A rooster crows, a bit off-key, perhaps mocking your struggle to acclimate. You realize with a gentle sigh that surviving a single day here is not about heroism. It's about rhythm, observation, and a healthy tolerance for mud in every conceivable place. You step further into the village as the morning thickens, your boots sinking slightly into the soft mud near the animal pens. The smell of straw, manure, and wet wool mingles in the crisp air, forming an aroma that, with practice, you might learn to call homey. You trudge toward the first set of chores, aware that each step brings a new responsibility: fetching water, tending animals, chopping firewood. A small child races past, carrying a bucket far too heavy for their size, wobbling dangerously but somehow never spilling a drop. You probably won't balance so gracefully, and that's fine, you're just here to observe. Historians still argue whether children's chores in Viking villages were more about survival training or socialization, and your inner voice wonders if they'd let you test the theory by lifting a pail. The well stands in the center of the village square, a simple structure of rough-hewn stones and a rope and bucket system. You lower the bucket, feeling the rough rope burn your palms as you crank it back up, the cold water sloshing against the wood. A villager chuckles at your effort, shaking his head as he swipes mud from his tunic. You notice a quirky habit. Some villagers tap the bucket thrice before drawing water, muttering blessings to the spirits of the well, an action that seems both superstition and subtle humor. Maybe it's to ensure the water tastes better. Who knows? The day is young and there are more mysteries than answers. Next comes animal care, and you trudge over to the pens. Pigs snuffle and root, goats bleat, and chickens scatter at your approach. One goat nudges your leg curiously and you almost lose balance. You scoop feed from a wooden trough, the texture gritty with bits of grain and occasional straw. A cow nudges your arm, reminding you that the animals are heavier and more persistent than they appear in illustrations. There's an odd satisfaction here, an earthy rhythm to tending creatures that will provide food, milk, and trade value. Some villagers add an unusual twist. A goat is given a tiny bit of leftover porridge as a treat, a small indulgence amidst the toil. Historians still argue whether these indulgences were common or reserved for particular occasions, but you're too distracted by the goat licking your sleeve to care. By mid-morning, chopping firewood becomes your focus. You lift the axe, feel the heft in your hands, and swing at a log stubbornly resistant to your modern strength. Chips fly, your arms ache, and your clothes begin to smell faintly of pine and dust. You notice a local technique, leaning slightly to the left, adjusting foot placement, which seems oddly effective. You mimic it, missing the mark entirely, but the humor of the struggle lightens the otherwise tedious task. Villagers chat in the background, voices rising and falling with the rhythm of work, and you realize that morning chores are as much about community as they are about survival. Between tasks you glance around and notice small, quirky routines. One woman hums softly while tending the chickens, another sharpens a knife with a meticulous focus that borders on meditative. These actions might seem trivial, but they keep the village moving and spirits afloat. You trudge from one task to another, each step reinforcing that surviving here requires stamina, patience, and an awkward embrace of dirt under fingernails and mud on boots. Already the day's first sweat beads on your forehead. You remind yourself to breathe and observe. The beauty of the village is in the details, in the small gestures, and in the slightly absurd choreography of morning survival. As the sun rises higher, you finally step back for a moment, wiping your hands on your tunic, looking around at the bustling village. Smoke rises from multiple hearths, animals are fed, water is drawn, and firewood stacked. It's organized chaos, and you realize that if you can endure this morning, perhaps there's hope for the rest of the day, though the list of chores is endless, and the mud has claimed several inches of your boots already. One cheeky thought crosses your mind. Maybe Viking villagers secretly enjoyed watching newcomers flail about. You laugh quietly, acknowledging the gentle cruelty of history's daily grind. Now that your arms ache from hauling water, feeding animals, and splitting firewood, it's time to consider breakfast, if you can call it that. You wander toward a small wooden table outside one of the longhouses, where the morning sun glints off the dew-laden straw. A villager offers you a piece of yesterday's flatbread, dense and a bit chewy, paired with a chunk of salted fish. You nibble hesitantly, the flavors briny and earthy, a taste that would take weeks to feel nostalgic rather than shocking. Historians still argue whether Viking diets were as varied as sagas suggest or if they mainly repeated the same simple meals. Either way, you can't help but notice how resourceful these villagers are, turning whatever they have into fuel for a long, laborious day. Beyond the main staples, you catch sight of some peculiar items. A small bowl of fermented shark, its pungent aroma curling around the edges of the table. You wrinkle your nose. Really? You whisper to yourself, imagining the intense patience, or bravery, required to develop a taste for this treat. Children nearby mimic adults by dipping pieces of bread into leftover fish brine, laughter spilling into the air. This quirky approach to food, while mildly alarming, also seems deeply rooted in tradition. The villagers appear unfazed, for them it's just breakfast. You make a mental note. Never underestimate what humans can adapt to when survival demands it. The morning meal is accompanied by a chorus of smells. Smoke from the hearth, the earthy tang of the ground beneath your boots, and the occasional whiff of herbs tucked into bread or fish. You reach for a piece of dried cheese and a goat approaches, nudging your hand in gentle protest. You feed it, chuckling at your new role in this ecosystem. Every bite of food, every small ritual, is a lesson in practicality and creativity. Even the act of eating becomes a social dance, a subtle negotiation between nourishment, hierarchy, and humor. You notice that children eat last, often getting smaller portions, yet they seem delighted, chasing each other and practicing skills they'll need as adults. Historians still debate how much of Viking cuisine was seasonal and locally sourced versus imported through trade routes. Looking around, you see baskets of roots, barrels of salted fish, and jars of preserved berries, suggesting a surprisingly intricate system of food storage. You also spot the occasional unusual snack, a small dish of honey mixed with herbs, likely intended for medicinal purposes but consumed like a treat by the young. It's an intriguing combination of survival and experimentation, reminding you that even in harsh environments, humans seek comfort and a little bit of delight in their meals. You take a slow bite, letting the flavors settle, and consider the broader lesson. Food is not just fuel here, it's also social glue, teaching patience, observation, and an appreciation for the slightly absurd elements of daily life. The villagers chatter, laugh, and share small victories over a particularly stubborn loaf or a perfectly cured piece of fish. You sip water from a wooden cup, noticing how the simple act of hydration carries both practicality and ritual, echoing the rhythm of the day. With breakfast concluded, you prepare to tackle the next unavoidable aspect of Viking life: weapon maintenance. After finishing your slightly pungent breakfast, you trudge toward the blacksmith's corner of the village, where axes, spears, and wooden shields lean haphazardly against posts or rest on workbenches scarred from generations of labor. The air here smells sharply of iron, smoke, and the tang of wet wood. You pick up a worn axe, feeling its weight and balance, and immediately appreciate why this isn't a toy. Villagers swing with precision, tapping metal edges to sharpen or realign them. You fumble through your first attempts, the axe either biting too deep into the stump or bouncing harmlessly off it. A chuckle escapes you. You can almost imagine a Viking teen observing your awkwardness, silently judging your survival potential. Historians still debate whether everyday weapon maintenance was truly as meticulous as sagas suggest, or if some stories have been exaggerated for dramatic flair. One curious practice catches your eye. Some warriors coat their blades with a thin layer of animal fat overnight, supposedly to prevent rust and improve cutting ability. You're skeptical at first, imagining a greasy mess, yet the technique seems surprisingly effective. Nearby, a villager meticulously hammers dents out of a small shield, humming a tune that is part melody, part rhythm for concentration. The repetition, the smell of heated metal, and the soft clang of tools create a strangely calming auditory backdrop. You notice that these simple rituals are laced with humor too. Someone accidentally sparks a tiny fire while striking a bit of leftover scrap, and another chuckles, tossing a handful of dirt to smother it before it becomes a spectacle. Personal armor habits vary wildly from one villager to another. One man wears a patchwork leather vest with tiny iron studs, while another relies solely on layered wool and fur. You try on a helmet, adjusting the leather chin strap, and immediately realize why many newcomers fail in battle. The combination of weight, restricted vision, and uneven balance is a workout in itself. The fringe tidbits of these habits, like attaching small charms for luck or personal insignias painted with soot, make you question the interplay between superstition and practicality. Historians still argue whether these charms were symbolic, protective, or simply decorative, and your curiosity is piqued as you watch a young warrior polish a rune-carved blade with meticulous care. In the background, a few villagers are sharpening arrows, their motions precise and fluid, almost meditative. You attempt one, noticing how the grain of the wood affects the angle and ease of sharpening. It's both frustrating and strangely satisfying, a dance of patience and skill that your modern hands are not yet accustomed to. Meanwhile, the occasional animal passes by, a goat nudging a bucket, a dog circling for scraps, adding a layer of unpredictability to the seemingly structured maintenance routine. By the time you step back and wipe sweat from your brow, you realize that weapon upkeep is far more than just practical. It's a mixture of art, superstition, and routine that keeps the village's warriors ready for any challenge. You even find a quirky rhythm to your own attempts, a slight chuckle escaping as you imagine the stories future historians will fabricate about your Viking proficiency. Already, you can feel that one day here requires more than strength. It demands observation, adaptability, and a dash of good humor to survive without losing your mind. The morning has passed, your muscles humming from chopping wood and carrying water, and now the rhythm of the village shifts toward crafting and trade. You wander past the longhouses, noticing smoke curling from blacksmiths' forges, the metallic tang blending with the faint sweetness of drying herbs and grains. A young weaver sits cross-legged on a wooden bench, fingers moving nimbly as threads twist into woolen cloth. You watch, fascinated, attempting to imagine how long it takes to create a single tunic, each stitch an investment of patience and practicality. Historians still debate how widespread these crafts were in small villages versus larger settlements, and you quietly wonder if a single longhouse could produce enough goods to sustain its people. The blacksmith hammers relentlessly, sparks flying with each strike, shaping not only tools and weapons but also small trinkets intended for trade. You notice a particularly unusual item, a tiny iron figurine of a horse, intricate and oddly delicate. A child points it out, laughing while the blacksmith grins knowingly. These fringe artifacts reveal that Viking villages were not merely survival-focused. They had a flair for creativity and perhaps even vanity. You pick up a shard of iron and feel its weight. imagining the hours spent transforming raw metal into something functional or ornamental. There's an odd poetry in the repetitive clang, and you catch yourself humming along, amused at your own desire to contribute something vaguely competent. Nearby, a trader has arrived with a small cart, offering amber beads, furs, and exotic grains. The villagers inspect each item carefully, bartering with practiced gestures and occasional soft laughter. You notice an amusing habit. Some buyers tap an item thrice before handing over their goods, a ritual that seems equal parts superstition and habit. The negotiation is both practical and social, a lesson in patience and observation. You might have walked away empty-handed if it weren't for the trader's easy smile, but you're learning. Survival in this village is not just about physical skill, it's about understanding the subtle dance of commerce and trust. Farming tools sit along the edge of the square, hoes, rakes, and spades showing evidence of constant use. Villagers repair them between chores, demonstrating resourcefulness and ingenuity. You attempt to sharpen a sickle only to slice through a scrap of rope by mistake. A nearby villager chuckles and offers a tip, which you try, failing again, and you realize that even the simplest tasks require guidance and attention. Yet, the process is oddly soothing. The repetitive motion, the tactile feedback, the small victories when a tool finally behaves as expected. Historians still argue whether trade and crafting in Viking villages were organized by specialization or by communal multitasking, and you feel the tension between both possibilities as you observe each villager in action. By midday, your hands smell of iron and straw, and your fingers are coated with a thin layer of dust and grime. Yet there's a rhythm here, a strange satisfaction in witnessing the village operate as a small, self-contained ecosystem. Craftsmen and traders, weavers and blacksmiths, all perform their roles with subtle humor and occasional quirks. You realize that these routines, however laborious, create a social cohesion that allows the village to thrive. Even if you might stumble through half the tasks, you understand that every swing of the hammer, twist of the thread, and bartered beat contributes to a delicate balance. An invisible rhythm that, once appreciated, makes the chaos feel almost meditative. As the sun edges higher, the village hums with activity, yet beneath the surface, subtle power dynamics shape every interaction. You wander toward a gathering of elders seated on a worn wooden bench beneath the shade of a large oak. Their conversation is low, filled with measured tones, but the undercurrent is unmistakable. This is village politics in action. One elder gestures toward the smithy, making a suggestion about resource allocation, while another responds with a wry smile and a slight shake of the head. You probably wouldn't grasp the nuances at first glance, and that's okay. The social rules here are as complex as any map of trade routes. Historians still argue whether these councils wielded actual authority or if much decision-making relied on informal consensus among villagers. You watch a young man attempt to interject, perhaps to voice a concern about livestock distribution. The elders barely glance, their expressions subtly communicating approval, skepticism, or amusement. There's humor woven into the procedure. One elder feigns outrage at a minor oversight, prompting quiet laughter among the audience. You, standing on the outskirts, can almost hear the invisible threads of influence and subtle competition. The art of surviving a day here isn't just lifting buckets or chopping wood, it's reading social cues, anticipating reactions, and occasionally laughing at the absurdity of human pride. Nearby, gossip drifts through the square, light but persistent. A woman whispers about an oddly shaped turnip found in a neighbor's garden. A man teases another for accidentally stepping on a chicken. You note these small, seemingly trivial exchanges, realizing they are integral to the community's cohesion and to informal regulation of behavior. Fringe habits emerge too. Some villagers carry small charms not just for protection against spirits, but perhaps as a playful display of status. You chuckle quietly. These subtle games of power and ritual are, in a sense, as essential to village survival as food or firewood. As you observe, a debate erupts over property boundaries near the riverbank. Voices rise slightly, but no one appears truly angry. The discussion is punctuated with practical suggestions, jokes, and occasional mock threats. You try to follow along, mentally mapping the hierarchy and influence patterns, though you suspect you're only catching fragments. Historians still argue how much formal law existed in Viking villages versus customary practice, and watching this, you understand the ambiguity. Survival often meant navigating social rules as deftly as tending animals or preparing meals. By late morning, you've absorbed the layered dynamics of power, gossip, and subtle negotiation. You realize that, much like your earlier attempts at chores or weapon care, understanding the social landscape requires patience, attention, and a sense of humor. You trudge toward a shady spot to catch your breath, reflecting on the lesson. Thriving here is not merely about strength or skill, but about perception, timing, and occasional charm. One elder notices your pause and smiles knowingly, perhaps recognizing your outsider status, yet silently acknowledging your effort to understand this intricate dance of village politics. You wander past the elders and settle near the open space where children cluster in small, boisterous groups. Their play is not merely entertainment, it is an early training ground for skills essential to surviving in the village. You notice one boy balancing a stick as if it were a sword, mimicking the motions of older warriors, while a girl carefully sorts pebbles into neat rows, likely practicing the dexterity needed for future craftwork. Children here live in a world where curiosity and labor coexist seamlessly. Historians still debate whether Viking games were primarily for skill development or simply for amusement, and observing them, you realize the answer is probably a mix of both. A particularly daring child climbs a low fence, balancing atop it with surprising confidence, eliciting cheers from peers. You can't help but grin at the audacity, though part of you wonders how long it will be before someone tumbles into the mud below. Meanwhile, younger children trail the adults, attempting chores that are far beyond their strength, carrying water, sweeping straw, and assisting with feeding animals. You watch a small girl carefully pour a bucket of water into a trough for the pigs, her face scrunched in concentration, and you remember your earlier morning misadventures with similar tasks. The humor of witnessing them mimicking adult routines is subtly comforting, as though the village has always known that learning through imitation is a gentle kind of survival training. Some children display quirky habits. One boy meticulously arranges sticks around a small pile of stones, creating tiny fortresses, while a girl collects odd feathers, probably for an imaginary craft or ritual. You wonder at the significance. Are these simple playthings or do they carry lessons passed down by generations? Regardless, their actions add color to the village and provide a reminder that daily life here is layered, blending practicality with imagination. A goat wanders into the play area, nudging a pile of sticks, sending peals of laughter echoing across the yard. You notice how adults subtly guide the children without overt supervision. A woman leans against a post, observing a group building a mock obstacle course, occasionally offering a tip on how to lift a bucket or balance better. It's gentle instruction interlaced with freedom, allowing the children to experiment while learning critical survival skills. Even small mistakes, spilled water, toppled sticks, or minor tumbles, become lessons in resilience. Historians still argue whether Viking upbringing emphasized strict discipline or a more laissez-faire approach, and seeing these playful interactions, you appreciate the balance between guidance and autonomy. As you watch, the children's laughter mingles with the ambient sounds of clanging tools, braying animals, and distant conversation. You begin to understand the rhythm of the village. Labor, learning, play, and observation coexisting in a carefully orchestrated pattern that ensures survival. You attempt to participate, offering a word of encouragement to a boy balancing a bucket on his head, only to be met with a mischievous grin. In that moment, you recognize a truth of village life. Understanding these young apprentices, their habits and quirks, is as vital as any skill you could master, and it quietly underscores just how improbable it would be to last a day without attentiveness, humor, and patience. By late morning, your attention shifts to the fields surrounding the village. The Viking settlement depends heavily on farming, and you trudge along muddy paths to observe the villagers tending to crops and livestock. Plows scratch the earth, oxen groaning under the load, while hands scatter seeds with careful precision. You notice that some plots are neatly organized into rows, while others appear more haphazard, revealing the improvisational nature of small-scale farming. Historians still argue how sophisticated Viking crop rotation techniques really were, and as you watch, it becomes clear that survival here demanded both knowledge and flexibility. A fringe tidbit emerges. Some farmers sprinkle crushed seashells around certain plants, believing it enhances growth or deters pests. You're skeptical, but the method seems effective enough to continue across generations. Nearby, a young woman balances on a small wooden beam, inspecting her barley, humming softly, a personal ritual that seems both soothing and functional. You follow her movements, noting the rhythm and repetition, which almost resemble a dance. The labor is taxing, yet there's a quiet satisfaction in seeing the land yield under human care, a blend of art and necessity. You join a villager in her daily livestock inspection, walking between sheep and goats, patting their wool and checking hooves. The animals are surprisingly cooperative, but every so often a goat nudges your leg or a sheep bolts in a random direction, reminding you that unpredictability is part of life here. You carry water to a trough and mix feed, attempting to mimic practiced gestures, though your modern body protests against the constant bending and lifting. A young boy follows, carrying a small rake, experimenting with his own technique. Laughter bursts from both of you when a mischievous goat swipes part of the feed, scattering it across the soil. Farming here is not just labor, it's a constant adaptation to weather, soil, and animal behavior. You watch a villager scratch at the soil before planting, whispering under her breath, perhaps a superstition, perhaps just habit. Historians still debate whether these rituals were widely practiced or personal quirks, and observing them, you realize that such actions provided rhythm, comfort, and a sense of control over an unpredictable environment. You trudge from plot to plot, occasionally pausing to admire the ingenuity. Simple irrigation channels, carefully stacked stones to prevent erosion, and hedges to protect crops from roaming animals. By midday, sweat is beading on your forehead, your hands coated in dirt and your boots heavy with wet soil. Yet there's a calmness in the methodical pace, a soothing cadence that underlies even the hardest work. You observe villagers communicating through subtle gestures, a nod here, a pointed glance there, ensuring coordination without shouting over the fields. It's a delicate balance of observation, effort, and social intelligence. You can almost feel the pride in each row planted, each animal tended, and you begin to understand why surviving a single day requires more than physical endurance. It requires patience, attention, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected quirks of life on the Viking farm. As the afternoon sun begins its slow arc, your thoughts naturally turn toward hygiene and health. Though in a Viking village these concepts are, well, flexible. You trudge past the longhouse where the bathhouse sits, a modest wooden structure with a small tub of heated water, steam rising in gentle swirls. You notice a few villagers carefully entering, scrubbing with rough linen cloths and occasionally applying herbs or scented oils. The smell is a mixture of smoke, plant oils, and, honestly, a touch of lingering livestock scent. You grimace, then remind yourself, this is survival, not a spa retreat. Historians still argue whether these bathing practices were daily routines or reserved for special occasions, and you quietly hope it leans toward the latter. You watch an older woman prepare a concoction of crushed herbs and honey, claiming it soothes the skin and wards off infections. Her technique is meticulous, her gestures almost ritualistic. Fringe knowledge in action. Apparently, a pinch of crushed birch bark in the water can prevent certain skin irritations. You observe skeptically, dipping a finger into the tub, and wince slightly at the rough texture. You notice that villagers seem unfazed by this blend of practicality and superstition. Another reminder that what feels odd to a modern eye was considered essential then. A young boy, curious as always, mimics the process, much to the amusement of nearby adults. Dental care is similarly rudimentary yet surprisingly inventive. You watch a man chew on a small twig, stripping the fibers to use as a makeshift toothbrush. He hums a tune while doing so, a habit passed down through generations, and occasionally he pauses to inspect his teeth in a polished piece of metal acting as a mirror. Historians still debate whether Viking dental hygiene had any meaningful impact on longevity or health, but watching him, you can't help but admire the improvisation. You quietly try to imitate, realizing your teeth are far too accustomed to minty toothpaste to handle the rough fiber without flinching. Beauty rituals also intersect with hygiene in unexpected ways. A woman carefully applies a paste made from clay and water to her face, claiming it tightens skin and adds a subtle glow. Nearby, another applies a streak of soot under her eyes, both for charm and perhaps intimidation during work. The combination of practical and decorative is fascinating. You chuckle softly, imagine trying that on a Zoom call today. Fringe yet functional, each step is a blend of superstition, necessity, and personal expression. By late afternoon, you trudge to the edge of the village to watch the communal bath fade into daily chores. Hands scented faintly with herbs, clothes damp and heavy, you notice a rhythm emerging. Hygiene, like all else in the village, is interwoven with observation, tradition, and the occasional playful eccentricity. You realize that surviving a day isn't just about endurance, it's about attention to detail, learning from observation, and quietly laughing at the absurdities of life. In this, the village teaches you one more essential lesson. Preparation and care, even in the smallest forms, make all the difference. With the late afternoon settling in, your ears catch the first strains of music and storytelling drifting from the village square. Skalds, the resident poets and performers, have gathered under a large oak, their voices weaving tales of gods, heroes, and ordinary villagers who became legends, or at least survived long enough to be remembered. You trudge closer, drawn by the melodic cadence, realizing that entertainment here is both cultural education and gentle amusement. A light-hearted story about a mischievous boy stealing goat milk draws quiet laughter from children and adults alike. Historians still debate how much of Norse oral storytelling reflected actual events versus mythological embellishments, and you find yourself leaning toward the "a little of both" theory. One performer balances a small drum while reciting lines with a sing-song rhythm, occasionally pausing for dramatic effect. You notice quirky habits: a quick wink at a child in the audience, a nod to a neighbor to signal a joke, subtle interactions that make the performance a communal affair rather than a solo recital. You watch closely, marveling at how the audience's reactions guide the storyteller's timing. There's a delicate dance of observation, improvisation, and humor, not unlike what you've seen during chores, but here it's wrapped in melody and laughter. Nearby, a group of young women hum softly while spinning wool, integrating music into mundane labor. Their voices blend seamlessly with the storyteller, creating a soothing auditory backdrop. A child taps a small wooden stick, mimicking a drum, slightly out of rhythm, yet adding a charming authenticity to the scene. Fringe habits emerge. One villager rubs a small stone between her fingers, claiming it helps her memorize verses, a tradition whose origins are unclear but which persists across generations. You find yourself unconsciously relaxing to this rhythm, realizing that storytelling and music are survival tools as much as swords and plows, teaching memory, social norms, and humor all at once. You notice humor interspersed with instruction. Tales of foolish deeds, like a man mistaking a wolf for a stray dog, draw laughter while imparting subtle lessons about caution, awareness, and community wisdom. Watching this, you reflect on the absurdity and gentleness of human teaching methods, acknowledging that amusement often cements knowledge far better than lecture alone. Historians still argue whether skaldic storytelling primarily served ritual, entertainment, or pedagogy, and witnessing the seamless blend of all three, you suspect the line between them was always intentionally blurred. As the performance winds down, villagers linger, exchanging observations, quietly correcting misremembered lines, or improvising on themes. You feel the calming effect of this communal ritual, sensing the interconnectedness of work, play, and memory. The music fades into the background as you prepare to move on, carrying with you a sense that even in the simplest village, art, humor, and storytelling serve as glue for survival, connection, and subtle education. In this, another layer of Viking life reveals itself, as essential and enduring as fire, water, or iron. As shadows lengthen, you trudge toward the village's cooking area, where the scent of evening meals begins to mingle with the cool air. Hearth fires glow warmly, sending flickers of light across the rough-hewn wooden walls of the longhouses. You notice pots suspended over open flames, boiling soups thick with grains, roots, and the occasional salted fish. Villagers move with practiced ease, stirring, tasting, and adjusting seasoning without need for recipe books or timers. You probably won't replicate such precision with a modern kettle, but watching, you gain a new appreciation for improvisation. Historians still argue whether Viking communal meals followed strict schedules or were more fluid, and the easy rhythm you observe suggests flexibility guided by both hunger and social cues. One woman tends a pot with remarkable patience, sprinkling herbs into the bubbling stew while occasionally teasing a neighbor for oversalting yesterday's broth. Laughter punctuates the air, highlighting that humor is woven into the fabric of daily survival. A fringe habit catches your attention. Some cooks toss a pinch of dried flowers into porridge, believing it improves digestion or enhances dreams. You raise an eyebrow at this subtle superstition, noting the balance between practicality and whimsical tradition. Every action, even seasoning, carries a dual purpose: sustenance and social engagement. Meanwhile, children scurry about carrying bowls and small spoons, learning to assist without causing chaos. You observe one child carefully distributing porridge, balancing precariously on a mud-caked path. The small gestures, the careful tilting of a bowl, the quiet encouragement of an adult, demonstrate patience, coordination, and subtle mentorship. You fumble to mimic their efforts, spilling a tiny portion, eliciting a quiet chuckle from a nearby villager. Humor, again, is an essential teaching tool, softening mistakes and reinforcing observation. The aroma and warmth draw everyone closer, creating a sense of cohesion. Villagers share stories and observations while preparing food, blending labor, conversation, and instruction. You notice one elder whispering a tip to a young cook about boiling root vegetables to maximize flavor. An intimate, almost conspiratorial lesson passed along quietly. Historians still debate the level of culinary sophistication in Viking villages, but these subtle exchanges suggest an intricate knowledge passed via demonstration and gentle guidance rather than formal instruction. By dusk, the final touches on meals are complete. Bowls are filled, fire embers glow steadily, and the village settles into a comforting evening cadence. You reflect on the choreography required to keep the culinary side of life running smoothly. Observation, patience, humor, and improvisation. It's not simply about feeding bodies, it's about reinforcing social bonds, sharing knowledge, and preparing the village for the night ahead. The lesson is clear. Without attentiveness, adaptability, and a dash of humor, surviving a single day in this village would have been remarkably difficult. The sky darkens, and the village settles into the slower pace of evening. You trudge toward the longhouses where families gather, noticing the interplay of light and shadow as the last rays of sun filter through wooden slats. Hearth fires crackle, sending golden light dancing across faces, casting a warm, cozy glow over the rooms. You probably won't last a day here without appreciating the subtle rhythms of the village, and that includes these quiet domestic moments. Historians still debate whether Viking domestic spaces were primarily functional or deliberately designed to foster social cohesion, and observing the interplay of light, space, and activity, you begin to see the answer. Inside, women and men sit cross-legged, weaving, mending clothing, and preparing small tools for tomorrow. The soft hum of conversation mixes with the occasional clatter of utensils or a child's giggle. You notice a quirky habit. Some adults hum or whistle while working, a form of gentle motivation, or perhaps a way to communicate without raising voices. You mimic the tune softly, and a young child looks at you wide-eyed and curious. The blending of work, sound, and subtle humor creates an almost meditative atmosphere. Even a newcomer like you can feel the calming cadence seeping into your bones. Food from the earlier preparations is being portioned for the night, and you watch villagers carefully distribute loaves of bread, small servings of porridge, and salted fish. Children receive their shares last, reinforcing lessons in patience and community hierarchy. You help, attempting to lift a bowl, spilling a little, and earning a gentle, amused glance from a nearby woman. Fringe habits continue. A small pinch of herbs is added to a child's portion to encourage restful sleep, an old tradition whose origins are lost to time. It's a reminder that even mundane routines carry layers of purpose, belief, and subtle humor. You notice the ambient sounds, the soft clatter of tools being set aside, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional crackle of firewood. The villagers' movements are deliberate, minimizing chaos while allowing for gentle interactions. Even in the dimming light, the subtle choreography of daily life is evident. One person passing bread, another stirring a simmering pot, a child fetching a small tool, all woven into a pattern of calm, efficient domesticity. Historians still argue whether these patterns were consciously maintained or evolved organically over generations, and perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. By the time night fully settles, the household tasks are complete. The air carries a faint scent of herbs, wood smoke, and damp earth, a comforting reminder of survival and rhythm. You trudge to a quiet corner, reflecting on the day's lessons: patience, observation, humor, and adaptability. Each small domestic action reinforces the village's resilience, and you realize that thriving here requires a keen eye for both the obvious and the subtle. Without these skills, you wouldn't last a day, and perhaps in truth, you've already discovered how mercilessly charming daily Viking life can be. Night deepens, and the village begins its quieter routines. You trudge past flickering hearths toward the longhouse doors, where faint lamplight spills onto the ground. The air is cooler now, carrying the earthy aroma of straw, wood, and animals settling in for the night. You notice that the villagers move with deliberate slowness, tending to final chores, adjusting bedding, and checking that fire embers are safely contained. You probably won't last a day without appreciating these evening rituals. They are both practical and quietly comforting. Historians still argue how much of these nightly routines were standardized versus improvised by circumstance, and observing them, you sense a rhythm that blends both. A fringe tidbit catches your attention. Small charms made of bone or carved wood are tucked beneath pillows or hung above sleeping areas, intended to protect from bad dreams or wandering spirits. You suppress a smile at the blend of superstition and habit, yet the villagers treat these objects with gentle reverence. Even children participate, placing their own tiny talismans beside their heads, while adults exchange knowing glances, reinforcing social bonds in subtle ways. The interplay of superstition and daily life demonstrates the villagers' ingenuity and their understanding of psychological comfort in uncertain environments. Meanwhile, a woman hums a low tune while adjusting bedding, a practice repeated for years yet entirely unhurried. A man ensures the animals are secured, checking doors and feeding troughs with soft murmurs. You follow their movements, trying to match the calm attentiveness, though your modern instincts urge haste. Humor appears again in small ways. A goat slips through a gate, prompting a gentle chase punctuated by laughter rather than frustration. These minor incidents highlight a gentle, practical approach to life that contrasts sharply with the chaos you might expect. You take a moment to observe the night sky through gaps in the wooden walls. Stars sparkle faintly, and the cool breeze carries the distant sounds of waves or forest life. Villagers pause occasionally to appreciate the view or share a quiet comment, a subtle reminder that mindfulness is woven into survival. Historians still debate how much awareness of natural cycles influence daily routines, and you sense that even casual observation of sky, season, and weather is an essential part of their existence. By the time you settle into a corner of the longhouse, the village has embraced a calm, muted rhythm. Fires glow softly, children yawn, and adults relax their shoulders. You reflect on the day's lessons: patience, observation, humor, adaptability, and realize that survival requires more than strength or skill. It demands attentiveness to subtle cues, appreciation for ritual, and the ability to move harmoniously with the quiet cadence of daily life. Without this awareness, you wouldn't last a single day in the Viking village, and perhaps, you think with a gentle smile, that's exactly why it feels both challenging and oddly serene. The village now rests in the soft embrace of night, but your journey isn't quite over. You trudge quietly among the longhouses, noticing small pockets of light where villagers remain awake, some tending last-minute chores, others whispering stories or sharing quiet laughter. You probably won't last a day without recognizing these subtle after-hours routines. They reveal as much about survival as any midday labor. Historians still argue whether such nighttime activity was common across all Viking villages or limited to particularly busy seasons, and the gentle hum of the village tonight seems to suggest a mix of both. You spot a man repairing a fishing net by firelight, his movements careful and rhythmic. Fringe practices emerge. He occasionally dips fingers into melted resin before nodding, claiming it strengthens the fibers and keeps them supple. You watch him, fascinated, and can't help but admire the precision and patience required. Meanwhile, a young girl tiptoes with a small bundle of herbs, scattering them near sleeping animals to ward off pests or perhaps bad dreams. The blend of superstition, practicality, and gentle humor creates a comforting, almost meditative atmosphere, demonstrating that survival encompasses more than physical effort. It's also about care and attentiveness. Near the longhouse entrance, two men quietly discuss the day's events, laughing at minor missteps, like spilled water or a goat's mischievous antics. Their voices are low, blending with the ambient sounds of distant wind and the occasional crackle of dying embers. You notice the subtle choreography. One nods while the other gestures toward a tool, ensuring clarity without disrupting the village's calm. Historians still debate whether informal communication like this was structured or spontaneous, and you realize that observation alone would be key to understanding it. A small group of children peek from a corner, whispering and giggling, practicing songs or retelling small stories from earlier in the day. Their enthusiasm is tempered by adult presence, yet they manage to sneak in moments of joy. You quietly join in humming along, careful not to startle them, and a gentle smile spreads across your face. Humor, play, and subtle instruction continue to weave together seamlessly, demonstrating that even in the darkest hours, life's rhythms carry on with quiet efficiency. By late night, you settle near a faint fire, reflecting on the day's lessons and the intricate weave of work, play, and ritual. The village, now cloaked in darkness, exudes a serene yet purposeful energy. You realize that surviving here isn't just about skills or strength. It's about observation, adaptability, and appreciating the subtle humor threaded throughout each task. One day you might manage to follow this rhythm. For now, you understand why even a single day demands careful attention, patience, and gentle amusement. The village is quiet now, and the final layer of evening settles over longhouses, fields, and animal pens. You trudge slowly toward a corner near the largest hearth, feeling the warmth radiate and the comforting crackle of the fire soothing your senses. You probably won't last a day here without noticing the small intentional acts that make life manageable. The gentle tending of fires, the careful stacking of tools, the whispered reminders of daily routines. Historians still debate how much of these nocturnal patterns were formalized versus instinctual, and observing them, you begin to appreciate the delicate balance that holds the village together. A fringe observation: some villagers leave small bowls of water or milk for household spirits, quietly acknowledging the unseen while ensuring practical tasks like pest prevention continue. You find it charming and a little humorous. The blend of superstition, practicality, and care is a recurring theme. Across the longhouse, a man checks that his tools are dry, aligning them precisely against a wall. Nearby, a woman gently rocks a child who has not yet drifted to sleep, humming a soft, rhythmic tune. The combined actions, tending, protecting, preparing, reveal a constant, subtle vigilance that defines Viking life. You notice shadows playing across walls, animals breathing softly, and the occasional creak of timber settling under the night's cool air. Villagers pause to observe, quietly nod to one another, or laugh at a minor mishap, such as a goat nudging a sleeping cat. These moments, small and often overlooked, form the invisible web of social cohesion, humor, and survival. Historians still argue whether humor served as a coping mechanism, a teaching tool, or merely a pleasant distraction, and you realize it likely served all three purposes seamlessly. You trudge to the edge of the hearth and settle on the floor, reflecting on the day from sunrise to this quiet evening. You think about the rhythm of chores, meals, trade, storytelling, hygiene, and social dynamics, all requiring observation, patience, and subtle intuition. The village is more than a collection of longhouses. It's a carefully orchestrated ecosystem of people, animals, rituals, and humor. The realization settles over you gently. Surviving here demands far more than strength or endurance. It requires mindfulness, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected quirks of daily life. As the fire dims, your eyelids grow heavy. The rhythmic breathing of villagers, the soft murmur of distant wind, and the gentle flicker of embers create a lullaby of routine and subtle comedy. You recognize that even the smallest acts, balancing a bucket, telling a joke, arranging herbs, play vital roles in sustaining this delicate society. One day perhaps you might navigate it successfully. For now, you appreciate the intricate harmony and gentle humor that make life here simultaneously challenging, absurd, and soothing. The day has finally come to a gentle close, and the village breathes in unison with the soft, comforting rhythm of night. You sit quietly by the dying embers of the hearth, feeling the warmth seep into your bones as shadows stretch and melt across the longhouse walls. Outside, the animals are settled, the wind whispers through trees, and the occasional hoot of an owl punctuates the calm. The earlier chaos of chores, laughter, and labor now feels like a distant melody, leaving behind only the subtle hum of life at rest. You reflect on everything you've witnessed today, the careful tending of fires, the rhythmic motions of farming, the playful chaos of children, the gentle guidance of elders, and the occasional quirk or superstition that makes life richer and more colorful. Each small act, washing, weaving, mending, storytelling, formed part of a delicate web that keeps the village thriving. It is a world where humor softens labor, observation sharpens understanding, and patience sustains both body and spirit. Even missteps, spills, and goat-induced mishaps are woven into the fabric of daily life, reminding you that imperfection is part of survival and often part of joy. As your eyes grow heavy, you notice the gentle cadence of breathing, muted conversations, and the distant murmur of water or wind outside. You feel a sense of connection to this place, a quiet awe at the ingenuity, care, and subtle humor that allowed people to endure and even flourish long before modern conveniences. Each detail, from tiny charms beneath pillows to whispers around the fire, serves as a reminder that life is sustained not only through skill and strength but through attentiveness, observation, and community. Now, allow your mind to settle into this rhythm. Let the warmth of the hearth, the soft laughter, and the gentle night sounds lull you toward rest. You've traveled through a Viking village, absorbing its lessons and quirks, and as your breath slows, remember, survival is as much about patience and humor as it is about labor.